If there's a voice inside your head that criticizes you constantly, a voice that tells you that you're not enough, that you should have done better, that everyone else is ahead of you, that something is fundamentally wrong with you, a voice that speaks to you in a tone you would never use with anyone you love, I want you to consider something that may change everything about how you relate to that voice. It is not yours. It never was. You did not invent it. You did not choose it. You did not sit down one day and decide to build a cruel narrator inside your own mind. That voice was installed in you long before you had any ability to consent, question, or defend yourself. And once you begin to see that voice for what it truly is, the way you experience your entire inner life can begin to change. For over 45 years, in the deep work of trauma and psychology, one pattern has appeared again and again. Extraordinary human beings, gifted, sensitive, capable of enormous love for others, treating themselves with a harshness that would shock them if they heard someone else use it on a stranger. And when this pattern is finally examined honestly, the same question always emerges. Where did that voice actually come from? Because no child is born with an inner critic. No infant enters this world thinking, I am not lovable. No small child looks in the mirror and thinks, I'm a disappointment. That voice, that particular flavor of contempt you carry inside you, had to be built. And it was built, most often, by the environment you were placed in before you had any choice in the matter. Carl Jung understood this at the deepest level. He said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And one of the most unconscious things in most human beings is the origin of the voice they use against themselves. They believe it is simply how they think. They believe it is their own honest self-assessment. They believe it is truth. But it is not truth. It is inheritance. Every child absorbs the emotional language of the people who raise them. Not just the words they hear, but the tone, the atmosphere, the unspoken judgments, the silences, the sighs, the moments of withdrawal, the conditional warmth. A child cannot separate themselves from the environment they grow up in. They do not have the ability to say, that harsh comment was really about my father's own unhealed pain. They do not have the ability to say, my mother's disappointment is a reflection of her own life, not a truth about mine. A child absorbs everything as if it were about them, because their developing sense of self is being formed in real time by every message they receive. If you grew up in a home where love was conditional, you absorb the voice that measures your worth by performance. That voice is still speaking inside you. If you grew up in a home where feelings were treated as inconvenient, you absorb the voice that shames you for being emotional. That voice is still speaking inside you. If you grew up around a parent who was constantly disappointed or critical or unavailable or cold, you absorb the voice that echoes their disappointment, their criticism, their unavailability, their coldness. That voice is still speaking inside you. And here's what most people never realize. When you criticize yourself, you're almost never using your own words. You're repeating, word for word, tone for tone, the messages you received when you were too small to defend yourself against them. Your inner critic is not you. Your inner critic is a recording. And you've been playing that recording so long that you mistook it for your own voice. Before we go any deeper, I want you to do something small, something conscious, something that tells your own nervous system that you're ready to see this clearly. Go to the comments and type 520. 520 is not magic. It is a marker, a quiet signal that says, I see the voice. I am ready to understand where it came from. I am ready to stop believing that its cruelty is the truth about who I am. Type 520. Let it be witnessed. And then return, because what follows may begin to loosen a grip that has held you for most of your life. Because there are specific ways this borrowed voice speaks. And once you learn to recognize the fingerprints of these old messages, they begin to lose their power to define you. The first way the borrowed voice speaks is through impossible standards. It sets a bar you can never quite reach. No matter what you achieve, it moves the bar higher. No matter how much you do, it tells you it is not enough. This is not your own honest ambition. This is the voice of an environment where nothing you did was ever fully celebrated, where success was quickly followed by, but why did you not do more? Where good was never good enough. That voice is still measuring you by a scale that was never fair and never designed for a human being to succeed at. The second way the borrowed voice speaks is through comparison. It constantly points to others. Look at what they have. Look at how far ahead they are. Look at how effortlessly they seem to live. You are behind. You are less. You are failing. This voice was often built in environments where a child was compared to siblings, cousins, classmates, or the children of neighbors, where love was scarce and had to be won, where the child learned that their value existed only relative to someone else. That voice is still measuring you against people whose lives you cannot actually see from the inside and calling it clarity. The third way the borrowed voice speaks is through catastrophe. It takes small setbacks and turns them into evidence of complete failure. You made one mistake and suddenly the voice says, "You always mess things up." You had one hard day and suddenly the voice says, "You cannot handle anything." This exaggeration is not adult thinking. It is the voice of an environment that treated small errors as major offenses, where one wrong move brought overwhelming disapproval, where a child learned that any misstep threatened their sense of belonging. That voice is still responding to the present as if it were the emotional emergency of the past. The fourth way the borrowed voice speaks is through denial of your needs. It tells you not to complain, not to ask, not to bother anyone. It tells you that other people have it worse and your feelings are not important. This voice was often built in homes where having needs was met with irritation or withdrawal, where the child learned that being low maintenance was the only way to remain loved, where vulnerability was punished either loudly or silently. That voice is still convincing you, decades later, that your inner life is a burden rather than a birthright. The fifth way the borrowed voice speaks is through relentless anticipation of failure. Even in moments of peace, it whispers, "This will not last. Something will go wrong. Do not get comfortable. Do not trust this." This voice was often shaped in environments where good moments were unpredictable or where they were quickly followed by chaos. The child's nervous system learned to stay braced, even in joy, because joy was not safe. That voice is still trying to protect you from a danger that no longer exists in the present, but that lives on inside your body. The sixth way the borrowed voice speaks is through impossible responsibility. It tells you that every conflict is your fault. Every problem is because of you. Every disappointment in someone else's face is somewhere you're failing. This voice was often built in families where a child was made emotionally responsible for adults, where the moods of parents were treated as the child's job to manage, where the child grew up believing that keeping everyone else okay was the price of belonging. That voice is still crushing you under a weight that no adult should carry, let alone the child who first learned to lift it. If you recognize yourself in these patterns, understand something important. You are not weak for hearing these voices. You are not broken for believing them. You absorbed them faithfully because that was the intelligent thing to do as a child in your environment. Believing them kept you connected. Believing them kept you safe. Believing them was, in some sense, the price of remaining loved. But you are not that child anymore. You are an adult with the capacity to finally examine the recording that has been playing inside you for decades. And once you examine it, you can begin slowly and consciously to stop being ruled by it. The first step is to catch the voice in the act. Every time a harsh thought arises, Pause. Instead of immediately believing it, ask, is this actually true, or is it just familiar? Familiarity is not the same as truth. Something can feel deeply real simply because you have heard it 1,000 times. When you learn to notice the voice as a voice rather than as reality, you begin to loosen its grip. The second step is to identify whose voice it actually is. When you hear the criticism, ask, who first said this to me? Who taught me to see myself this way? You may hear your mother, you may hear your father, you may hear a teacher, a coach, a religion, a culture, a whole community. You may not always find one clear source, but even asking the question begins to separate you from the voice. Because when you realize the voice is a history, you begin to realize it is not simply you. The third step is to speak to yourself in a completely different tone, not with false positivity, not with forced affirmations, but with honest human warmth, the kind of warmth you might offer a child you love. When you fail, instead of you are useless, try this was hard and I am learning. When you're afraid, instead of you are weak, try it makes sense that I am scared. When you're tired, instead of you are lazy, try I've been carrying a lot and I'm allowed to rest. The fourth step is to let your body participate in the new voice. Words are not enough. Your nervous system has to feel the change. Place the hand on your chest when you're anxious. Breathe slowly. Hold your own arms when you feel small. Soften your shoulders when you notice them bracing. These simple gestures are not silly. They are the physical language of safety. And a body that has been braced for decades needs more than thoughts to soften. It needs the felt experience of care. The fifth step is to surround yourself with people who reflect a new voice back to you. You cannot maintain a compassionate inner voice while remaining constantly exposed to critical outer ones. Slowly, wherever you can, choose to spend more time with people who see your humanity, not just your usefulness. People who allow you to be imperfect. People who do not require you to shrink in order to be loved. Every relationship in which you are met with kindness becomes a mirror that helps you build a kinder inner world. The sixth step is to remember that this practice is not a one-time event. The old voice was built over years. The new voice must be built the same way. Not all at once, not perfectly, not without setbacks. Some days you will notice with quiet pride that you responded to yourself gently. Other days you will fall back into the old patterns and feel discouraged. Both are part of the process. What matters is not perfection. What matters is direction. And every small choice toward compassion is a step in a direction that most people never take in an entire lifetime. If you have followed these words to this point, something in you has already begun to shift. Because you have named the voice, you have seen where it came from, you have understood that you are not its origin, and therefore you do not have to be its prisoner. I want you to mark this moment. Go to the comments and type 11. 11 is the number of the threshold. It means you are standing at the doorway between the borrowed voice and your true one. Type 11 to declare, I am willing to stop repeating what was said to me. I am willing to begin speaking to myself in the way I always deserved. And if you wish, beneath 11, write one sentence. What is one thing you would say to yourself tonight, gently, honestly, as if you were finally the one adult in your own life who understood? Now hear this, because this is what I want you to carry long after this conversation ends. The voice inside your head that has been ruining your relationships, your rest, your joy, your peace, your confidence, your capacity to love and be loved, is not the voice of truth. It is not the voice of wisdom. It is not the voice of your soul. It is the voice of what happened to you. And what happened to you does not get to write the rest of your story. You are the one who gets to write it now. You do not have to silence the old voice forcefully. You only have to stop obeying it. You only have to begin in small daily moments to answer it with a different voice, a truer one, a gentler one, a voice that finally speaks to you the way someone should have spoken to you long before you learned to speak to yourself this way. The healing does not require you to become someone new. It requires you to become someone honest, someone who can hear the old voice and no longer confuse it with the truth, someone who can feel the old pain and no longer let it define the present, someone who can be tired, imperfect, human, unfinished, and still choose to remain on their own side. Every time you speak to yourself with compassion, you're undoing a small piece of what was done to you. Every time you refuse to repeat the cruelty you were raised with, you are ending a pattern that may have run through generations. Every time you choose kindness inside your own mind, you are building the safe place you were never given. You do not have to earn this. You do not have to be perfect to deserve it. You do not have to wait until your life looks a certain way before you begin. You only have to begin. And the beginning is always the same. One honest sentence spoken to yourself in a voice that is finally your own. You're allowed to stop believing the recording. You're allowed to become the author of your own inner voice.